Tom, you're muted. You're still muted, Tom.
Tom, you have to unmute.
I think the Zoom devils have hit our.
Tom,
chat
you're
again.
still muted.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Steve Day's up for
Okay.
thought of the day. Steve?
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. As I've done a number of times, I've reached into my father-in-law's files of invocations, thought of the day, and I came up with a, which I think is a good one today. They're all good, but this one I liked a lot. So it's a poem written by Dorothy Law Nolte. She lived here in Southern California, born and raised in Southern California. She was an American writer, poet, and a family counselor, born in Los Angeles in the 1920s and passed away about 15 years ago. And she wrote a poem. It's titled "Children Learn What They Live" by Dorothy Law Nolte. If a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to feel guilty. If a child lives with tolerance, he learns to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, he learns confidence. If a child lives with praise, he learns to appreciate. If a child lives with fairness, he learns justice. If a child lives with security, he learns to have faith. If a child lives with approval, he learns to like himself. If a child lives with acceptance and friendship, he learns to find love in the world. So on behalf of my father-in-law, Ray Zickville, former member, it's been an honor to recite this poem today. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That's very nice, very appropriate.
Thank you.
At this point in time, let's see here.
I'm here.
Just a second, Ed. How do I get this work before? Go to the next slide, which is Ed Gold, our song master, considering Mark Loretta as our speaker today, former all-star baseball player, gonna sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." You're up, Ed.
Okay, I'm gonna give it a shot. Hopefully, the players union and the owners will come to an agreement because we're getting close to spring training. Here it is. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Just buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Play ball, play ball.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Ed. And now we're going to have some introductions. Do we have any visiting Rotarians or UCLA Rotaracts here today? I can't see the entire screen. If not, I'm going to introduce Mark Loretta's uncle, Ricardo, AKA Taco Loretta. He's a past district governor, actually twice, for District 5330. Do you want to say hello to everybody, Ricardo?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here. I've heard a lot about your club from some of my friends in the governor line and your District 5280. I know you have a great club, and someday I'd like to visit you when you meet in person. So thank you very much for hosting my nephew Mark and for having such a great club.
Thank you, Ricardo, or I should say Taco. At this point, we're going to have some announcements for the day. The first one is, again, the March 3rd meeting. We're coming in person. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the San Marino Rotary, and they're starting the same day as we are in-person meetings after 2 years of Zooming. Negotiations with the Luskin Center necessitated us to give them a head count on Monday preceding the Thursday meeting. As such, we're trying to get such a accurate account of the members attending for the following Thursday. This has required us to change our billing procedures to a pre-billing list. It was sent out yesterday and several of you have already replied, changing from a yes to a no or no to a yes. And so therefore, I gave that to Terry today and he's preparing the billings. So unless you've told me what to do, you'll be getting a bill for the following quarter. Remember, you must be vaccinated. Benjamin Fisher is going to be our greeter. It's on his shoulders to prove you're vaccinated. So
That was not what we discussed. No. I am
Well,
not a great police officer.
you got a new
Diane will be holding my hand.
No, you've got a new duty. Diane delegated to you.
Okay, I'll take it on. Make sure
Everybody-
that you don't give me a hard time. Just show me something. That you've
Okay.
been vaccinated, okay?
But anyway, we appreciate you being vaccinated, if not tested. At this point in time, I'm gonna have a little feature of the day. It's guess the saying. Now, at the end, you've got to raise your hand or blurt it out, whatever. On George Washington's day, there were no cameras. One's image was either sculpted or painted. Some painting of George Washington showed him with an arm behind his back. Others showed both the arms and the legs. Prices charged by the painter was not based on how many people, but on how many limbs were to be painted. Arms and legs were limbs. The painting would cost painting would cost more. Hence the expression, it will cost you.
An arm and a leg.
You got it.
Very good. Very good.
Who said that? Steve?
Steve Day.
Steve Day. Common entertainment was card playing in those days, but there was a tax based on the cards purchased. But only the ace of spades was removed to avoid the tax. Thus, people would be required to only purchase 51 cards, yet most games would require 52 cards. These people were thought to be stupid or dumb because they weren't playing with.
A full deck.
Full deck.
Yeah, you got it, John. Several of you got that one, a full deck. Early politicians required feedback from the public, what people considered important. Since there were no telephones, TVs, or radios, I wish that was back. The politicians sent their assistants to local taverns, pubs, and bars. They were told to go sip some ale and listen to what people's conversations were and political concerns. Many assistants were dispatched at different times. You go sip here, you go sip there. The words go sip were eventually combined when referring to local opinion, and thus the term blank was created.
Gossip.
You got it. You guys are too sharp. Gossip.
Oh,
At local taverns, bars, pubs and bars, people drank from pints and quart-sized containers. The barmaid's job was to keep an eye on the customers and keep the drinks coming. She had to pay close attention and remember who was drinking in pints and who was drinking in quarts. Hence the phrase,
Mind your
Keep
P's
your
and
P's and Q's.
Q's.
Mind-
it's too obvious.
mind your P's and Q's. That's good. Those are good.
Okay, John, you're up to introduce our speaker of the day. I hope
I'll
you don't.
come.
Wait,
Before-
President Tom, time out, sorry, John. We have some guests with us today. Not just Taco, but we have Mary Pat, we have Jim Hackett, we have Hillary Loretta, and Rotaract Sarah.
I did not see that. Okay.
Okay.
I had,
Got that?
can I start now?
John, why don't you introduce real quick Mary Pat Cooper, who's a good friend of O'Keefe's
Yeah.
and ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'm glad Mary Pat is on, and also Kevin Cooper, I think, is on, I hope. And Jim Gaffney, I hope, is on. And Jim Hackett, I hope, is on. And Charlie Gaffney, I hope, is on. And my wife is a guest sitting right behind me here. So we have quite a few guests. Mark Loretta just brought them out of the woodwork, you know. So we have a lot of guests today. So I'm going to introduce Mark. And it's really an honor for us to hear from a real live Major League Baseball player and an all-star to boot. I consider myself very fortunate to have gotten to know Mark through some friends, very good friends, the Coopers, who are in the same family as Mark Loretta is, and also Taco, who I just met today. And I also should say that Taco noticed I'd made a mistake in my schedule when I listed Mark as having been the bench coach of the Chicago Cubs when they won the World Series in 2016. In 1916. It was 108 years, but Mark Loretta was not the bench coach at that point in time. He did become the bench coach in 2019. Anyway, Mark grew up in the LA area. He went to St. Francis High School in La Cañada. I believe there are members of our club who went to that school.
Yes.
I thought so. Tom Barron, that's right. And Mark is married to a lovely girl who I've met, Hillary, and he has 2 children, Frankie, a son and a daughter, Lucy. And going on here, he went to Northwestern University. Now that should ring a familiar tune with everybody in our club, because Northwestern University, sometimes known as the Stanford of the Midwest. And by the way, Mark got a baseball scholarship there. Does anyone know where Northwestern University is located?
Chicago.
Wrong.
Same town.
Evanston,
Pardon me?
Evanston.
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 It's located in Evanston, Illinois. What's the matter with you guys? And what else is located in Evanston, Illinois? The
All
headquarters
right.
of the International Rotary, and that's where Northwestern is. He went there on a baseball scholarship, and then he played collegiate summer baseball with the Falmouth Commodores in the Cape Cod Baseball League, which is a good place for a lot of guys who got into the majors, played in that league in the summer. So going on here, just some of his statistics, and he'll tell us more about these, I hope. But he played professional baseball in the big leagues, the big show, for 15 seasons. He played with the Milwaukee Brewers, the Houston Astros, the San Diego Padres, the Boston Red Sox, and guess who we finished up with? The Los Angeles Dodgers. And for those 15 seasons, he compiled a batting average of .295 with 629 runs batted in. I would say that sounds a little bit like Hall of Fame kind of numbers to me. That's what I believe anyway. He did become the bench coach of the Chicago Cubs under Joe Madden in 2019. And anyway, that's enough to say about Mark Loretta, except that we're delighted and honored to have him come and speak with us. So Mark, you're on now, please.
John, thanks for having me. Great to see so many familiar faces. Can everybody hear me okay? My audio, I'm not a big time Zoom veteran, but wish we were there in person together. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case, but I think it's going to be the case soon. Always really admired the Rotary clubs around the nation and got to know them much better through my uncle, Rich Taco. Funny to hear him be called Taco. It's a whole new moniker for me. And also, there's getting to know a little bit of the San Diego Rotary clubs here as well. They're big supporters of the community and of the Padres and of baseball in general. So great to be here. John, I appreciate the wonderful introduction. I'm not sure how much you left me to tell people. And I'm certainly not a Hall of Famer. I'll take a Hall of Decent if that's okay. It's
295 is a Hall of Fame average.
Well, I want to round it. I hope you round it up to 300. That's what I tend to do because I think it's 295.6. So that's all the math majors in the room. We're going to round it up. I hope that's okay. Anyhow, yeah. So I'm on Los Angelenan by birth. I was born in Santa Monica on the west side, but I grew up on the east side in Arcadia. As you mentioned, John, I went to St. Francis High School, which, by the way, is where the Seidler O'Malley family, a lot of the boys went. Walter O'Malley's grandchildren, actually, Peter Seidler now is the lead owner for the Padres. And his brother Tom also went to St. Francis High School, so we have that connection, which is great. My cousins, Mary Pat and Gary's children, Mary Pat's on the call. They all went to Loyola High School. So we had a pretty big rivalry, although Loyola was much better in football and most of sports than we were. It's a much bigger school, so we'll leave it at that. But anyway, LA area is very special to me. And John, you mentioned Stanford. I really wanted to go to Stanford out of high school. That was my number one choice. And there was a coach by the name of Mark Marcus there at the time. And he was the Olympic coach in Seoul, Korea in 1988. I graduated high school in 89. And he sent me a handwritten note that was postmarked from Seoul. In hindsight, it was probably an intern that was writing it for him. But long story short, Stanford decided to go with a different shortstop. And so I kind of scrambled around and, decided on Northwestern. It came down between Northwestern and Notre Dame. And as a Catholic kid from LA, it was tough to turn down Notre Dame, but I had a good feel for the coach and what kind of wanted to be around a little bit bigger city than South Bend. So Evanston being so close to Chicago was a good fit for me. And as John said, spent 4 years there, met my wife, Hillary. Probably the best thing that came out of Northwestern by a long shot was that. We have 2 great kids, been married now almost 23 years. So we've lived in San Diego since 2003. I played for the Padres in 2003, 4, and 5. And most people who come to play for the Padres, if they live somewhere else, they usually end up moving to San Diego full time. And that certainly was a case for us. Love it down here. Still get up to LA quite a bit to see the Coopers, and Hillary's got some family members on the west side of LA. So still make it up to LA quite a bit. As far as my career goes, I was drafted out of college by the Milwaukee Brewers, spent 8 years in Milwaukee. And then I got traded to Houston, spent a short time in Houston, and then came to San Diego for 3 years, got traded to the Red Sox for a year, then went back to Houston. And then, as John said, finished up with the Dodgers in 2009. And that was great too. Growing up a Dodger fan, my group was, Say, Russell, Lopes, Garvey, Dusty Baker, Steve Yeager, that whole group, Tommy Lasorda. So coming back to LA to finish my career was really something special. Joe Torre was the manager that year. We ended up making the playoffs. We lost to the Phillies in the National League Championship Series, but really a fun year to end my career on. And then, obviously came back to San Diego and went to work for the Padres in the front office. Did that for about 8 years, and then tried my hand at coaching, which I enjoyed. Our season kind of fizzled out in Chicago in 2019. We didn't make the playoffs, so Joe Madden wasn't retained, nor was I. So came back to San Diego and actually just took a job now with the Padres, back with San Diego Padres on the business side, on the business development side, the community relations. I'm going to run the alumni program for the team, and really happy to be connected with them. I think good things are in store for the Padres. We've got a good young team. Obviously going to be tough to unseat the Dodgers in the division. San Francisco is also a good team. So it's a real competitive division, but I think a lot of excitement around that. And I do think, don't quote me on it, but I do think the two sides will come to a deal before the regular season starts and not miss regular season games. Anything's possible, but I just think there's too much to lose on both sides. And a lot of times you need that deadline. I was involved in 2002 with the Players Association, and we actually set a strike date for August 31st of that year. And, thank God we got the deal done at the 11th hour there that year. So those things kind of tend to play out. You'll hear a lot of saber rattling the next few days, but I think as long as we get a deal done by March 1st is probably a date to keep your eye on. So that's more or less my story. I have one prop for you. So I said that I grew up as a Dodger fan, and I found this picture I don't know if you can all see it here. So the top picture is me as about a 7-year-old kid dressed in a Dodger uniform with the number 5 on it. And the middle one was my St. Francis uniform, and then this is a college uniform. But just so happened that when I made it to the Dodgers, when I got signed with the Dodgers, I ended up wearing number 5, as you can see. It's up on my wall there. So a little bit of a premonition there about 30 so years in between those two pictures. Kind of interesting. Happy to open it up to questions, comments. Anybody, what's on your mind? Great to spend some time with you guys. Sure.
Yeah, hi, Mark.
Hi.
What's your thoughts about universal DH? Do you like the idea the National League is now going to have a designated hitter?
I don't love the DH, but I do think both leagues should play under the same set of rules, whether it's the DH or whether it's non-DH. And I think from a game standpoint, where pitching has really, I think, gotten ahead of hitters with the velocity and things like that, that it's probably better to have another, true hitter in the lineup and not have to kind of sit through the pitcher. I understand the ideas of, bunting and strategy and double switches and things, but I do think we need more offense in the game. We need more balls in play. There's too many strikeouts, in my opinion. So I'm okay with the DH. I think with interleague play and everything, both sides should be playing on the same set of rules.
And when will that be? The 23rd season, 23 season, or is it even decided?
They're talking about it as part of this agreement. It could be as early as this year. I'm not positive on that.
Mark, I have a question.
Yeah.
I graduated from St. Francis in 1958, and during the early 50s, I was a big Ted Williams fan. In fact, right above my dealer here is a statue of Ted Williams. And in those days, he had a lifetime average of 344, and there were a lot of players over 300. I mean, you had to be hitting 300 to be easy Hall of Fame. Today, there are fewer players batting over 300. In fact, 295 would rate you right up near the top. What has changed in the last 40 years? Is it because the pitchers are only really pitching 5-6 innings to get rid of his reliever come in? Is it the steroids are off with all the abuses that happened in the past? What is it that have the batting averages come down for so many day-to-day players in the majors?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a combination of a lot of things that you mentioned. I think it, first of all, batting average isn't as valued as a statistic as it once was. If you look at how teams rate hitters and how they kind of grade them out, they're looking more for, on base percentage, slugging percentage, with the combination of those two is called OPS. Really kind of trying to drill down to see, how are runs created, how are runs produced, and essentially it's getting on base or driving runs in, even though RBIs is kind of out of fashion too, but it's really slugging percentage and on base percentage. Those two stats now have kind of taken the place of batting average. A lot of front office people, and it's kind of with Moneyball and everything, it's proven that, it's better to try and hit a double and a home run, and you may do that less time than just to get, a bunch of singles. It's tough to get 4 or 5 singles in one inning to push a run across, whereas you just need maybe 1 double and a single, or 2 doubles and certainly a home run as an instant run. So power has been valued, but my contingency is that, on base percentage, a big part of on base percentage is batting average, because particularly if you're not a big power hitter, they're not going to pitch around you. So you need to hit your way on base. And I think these things tend to come in and out of favor. I think the pendulum swung really far. You mentioned the steroid era, where everybody was hitting 20 home runs. That's out of the game for all intents and purposes. So I think you'll see a groundswell of batting average, of guys who can get on base, guys, more stolen bases again, because for a while there, the adage was, why steal a base and potentially risk it out when the next guy's going to hit a home run, then you lose a run there. So Now that the power is starting to come down a little bit, I think you'll see a little bit more small ball coming back in the game.
Well, I remember the talk about Ted Williams. They had such good eyes for hitting the ball that he would hit line drives a long time. And well, I mean, there's always exceptional players, and he was one of them,
Yeah.
of course. But that line drive has given up in favor of the home run, the power run. I agree with you, but you say it's mostly the players hitting and not the pitching that's changed.
Yeah, no, I do think that it's part of the pitching for sure. You mentioned that pitchers, particularly starting pitchers, are going shorter in the game. They're pitching 3, 4, 5, 6 innings max now, where it used to be, the complete game was very sought after. The Nolan Ryans and the Sandy Koufaxes, they'd go out there, they'd pitch 9 innings. And it's now you're very specialized. You have more guys in the bullpen. Velocity's higher. It's difficult to hit. There's also a big push on shifting defensive players around the diamond. Ted Williams, it all started with Ted Williams. Ted Williams was one of the biggest pull hitters in the history of baseball. And the shift, I think, originally started with Ted Williams. And he's like, well, I'm just going to hit it right through. He didn't give a darn about it, but it was in reaction to his style of hitting.
Okay. Phil Gabriel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I got a question about the shift. How do you feel? I think the shift should be outlawed. I think they should keep the players in the positions they are and let the pitcher do their job, let the fielders do their job. How do you feel about that? And also some technology like instant replays to change calls, that, and also like on TV when they have the batters, the strike zone on the screen, which drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I can't even watch the games now because of that stupid strike zone that they put up. How do you feel about some of the technology things going on?
I start with the shift. I think I agree with you. I think there'd be something in the shift. I don't think it should be just like a small box the guy has to stand with, but maybe your infielders have to stay on the dirt. Maybe you can shift them around, but they can't play. I kind of bugs me when the third baseman's playing short right field and a pop-up goes and all of a sudden the third baseman is out there. It's like, where'd he come from? So that's a little hokey. As far as the technology, I'm sort of a proponent of an electronic strike zone. And I know that's, most old school, people would disagree with me, but the technology's there. You could still have the umpire there to make the calls at home. You could get rid of that box you're talking about on TV, and there could be like an earpiece in the umpire's mind. So, get the calls right. I think the players are kind of for that. Instant replay is bulky. It takes too long between the time a play ends to the time they actually review it. So my suggestion, I've heard this from a few people, is to have a fifth umpire. There's 4 umpires always on the field. Have a fifth umpire that rotates around, sometimes on the field, but is always in the press box, so that if there's a replay that needs to be done, he makes the call instantaneously, 5-10 seconds, and it's his decision. I think instead of going back to New York and going, it just takes minutes. It's crazy. They got the manager standing here like this. It disrupts the flow of the game. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
You got it,
John?
Yeah, Mark, thanks again for your talk and questions so far. Who was the greatest player that you played with or played against or observed? Now, you played between 95 and 2010, roughly. Who was the greatest player that you ever played with or saw play live?
It's a great question. I think the most incredible thing I ever saw was Barry Bonds when he was in his prime, and of course, he did have some help with some performance enhancing drugs and things like that. But here's a guy who would get intentionally walked almost every time up to the plate. He might see 3 or 4 strikes a week, and he would always be ready for them and just always just barrel them up and drill them. It was amazing. Some of the other guys that I enjoyed playing with, I think one of the best hitters I ever saw when I played was a guy named Todd Helton. He played in Colorado, which kind of, he gets flack for that because it's supposedly an easier place to hit because of the elevation and things like that. But boy, could he could hit. He hit on the home and on the road. I think he should be a Hall of Famer. people ask me a lot about who the toughest pitcher I ever faced, and it's probably John Smoltz, particularly when he was closing games. He had 3 well above average pitches. And then Randy Johnson, I felt like I felt okay with him, but I think I was 2 for 32 off from lifetime. So that wasn't very good, but he was tough. You know, he was coming from a real tall angle and, you know, crazy talent.
I can't see the entire screen. Does anybody else have their hand up? If not,
Mark,
I do.
Mike, was that Mike Newman?
No,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
How do you analyze where the Dodgers are on their pitching, the Padres and the Giants for the coming year, especially the Bauer situation? I keep reading different things, and my understanding is the Dodgers can't even really fire Bauer if they wanted to until he's formally suspended or even finished his suspension. Do you know what's accurate on that as well?
I don't know too much about the legal wranglings over it, but I will say this, and this is you know, stays in this virtual room. But Dave Roberts is a good friend of mine. He said that he doesn't think Bauer will ever pitch for the Dodgers again. Just too much baggage there. I don't know what that means. They're going to trade him or release him or how it's going to work. But that was his sentiment. As far as pitching in the league, it's you know, like I said, the NL West is very competitive. I think Dodgers, you know, have an outstanding staff. You know, I really like, I'm blanking on his name right now, but the young right-hander, kind of a skinny guy. He just throws hard. Somebody help me out with his name.
Urias?
No, Urias is a lefty.
Walker
Buehler. I think he's the best pitcher in the division. He's got the best stuff and he's got the makeup. He's a bulldog out there. So, you know, as far as San Diego, we're hoping that, you know, we've got Yu Darvish, you know, from Japan, who's a former All-Star, and then Blake Snell, who really pitched well for Tampa Bay, had an off year last year, but we're hoping he comes back. So we'll see. I think it's going to be I think it'll be a 3-team race. You know, I would still say LA is probably the class of the division, but I think, you know, San Diego and San Francisco are right there with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve Shear's got his hand up. Steve?
Steve?
this is a great talk, Mark, and I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Which do you think is harder to hit? A fastball that's a baseball, or a golf ball that's stationary on the ground?
Well, that's an easy question. I appreciate it, but I think you answered the question with your last statement. You know, stationary on the ground, that's the whole key. Even though hitting a golf ball can be frustrating, it's not. I mean, in terms of at least making contact, it's a lot easier. But I'm not sure it's any easier to be a professional golfer than it would be to be a professional baseball player. Both take, you know, exceptional eye-hand coordination, and but I probably had a golf club in my hand before a baseball bat. My dad played golf at Loyola University, which is now Loyola Marymount. So he taught me the game, and Taco's not a bad player himself. Never as good as my dad, but he could hit it around okay.
Most baseball players are just excellent golfers, and it's that hand-eye, isn't it? It doesn't matter whether the ball's stationary or moving. I
think so. And you know, who's really good, speaking of professional athletes, are hockey players. You know, they've got that stick in their hand on the ice, and they're chasing a little puck around. From my experience, they're excellent golfers.
Mark Rogo, you have your hand up.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Mark.
The minute I got married in 1976, I joined my in-laws' family, who were lifelong season ticket holders at Dodger Stadium. So been a big part of our life. But I've watched the business model over the years, and it just seems to me, and this is what I'd like to hear your observation on, that no owner really had a passion for the game. They looked upon it as a business since the O'Malleys. Ever since then, it's all been about money, and particularly the Australian, I forgot what's his name, who owns the Newsday.
Murdoch.
Yeah, Murdoch
only went to one baseball game his entire life before he became a Dodger owner. And so, you know, and with the ticket prices going up every year, and they plastered, you know, they've plastered ads and used every inch to raise revenues, and they're using all kinds of other ways to raise revenues. Now it's $50 to park your car over there, and $10,000 a year corporate parking spots. And I know I had to go threaten one of these guys one time when I showed up for a postseason game with my season tickets and my parking pass, and the lot was completely sold out. There wasn't a place for me to park when I already paid for the parking pass. You know, they get really creative on how they really want to raise revenue and squeeze the Dodger branding name. So my question really is your observation on how baseball has become a business, is no longer the national pastime.
Well, I think it's always been a business, you know, from the owner's standpoint. But I think you're right. There are degrees of owners who are more passionate about baseball than others. We feel real fortunate in San Diego to have the Seidler family down. They really, you know, they care about the game. They've you know, raised the payroll for the, you know, small to mid-market team. We had the third highest payroll in all of baseball last year. It's pretty amazing. But, you know, yeah, it's a tough thing, and now being on the business side, these are conversations that I know the Padres have in terms of, you know, how do we make sure that we maximize our revenues for our shareholders, for our owners, yet keep, you know, keep some affordability to the game. Like you said, it is a pastime. It's meant to be enjoyed by families, and what's interesting is the real money in professional sports, particularly baseball, is in the resale value of the franchises. You know, they're not overly concerned with the, you know, the day-to-day revenue. I think most teams could tell you if they could, you know, come to a break even or make a small profit. The franchise values have gone up over 1,000% across the board on average in the last 10 years. So, you know, when you hear the Padres, the Seidler O'Malley group bought it for, I think, $750 million, and, you know, give or take a few $100 million, and everybody was like, I can't believe they paid that much. It's probably worth $2 billion now, and that was 10 years ago. So that's where the crazy money is in the resale value. And I think teams, you know, I was talking to our food and beverage guy at the Padres. He said, you know, we could charge whatever we wanted for beer, because people are going to come to the stadium and they're going to want to have a couple of beers. So, you know, we could charge $30 a beer, but, you know, we do keep that, even though it's, you know, $14, $15, it seems like a ton. You know, there's still room on the revenue side. So, you know, it's a for-profit entity, and they're sensitive to that. But I think is some sensibility, particularly from where I sit, to keep it accessible to as many people as possible.
Ed Gold.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I had a question, and I'll start off with just discussing very quickly a tennis player. I was talking to the mother of a tennis player who is now the top tennis player in the United States. The kid was about 16 years old, and she said he was thinking, he didn't know whether to get a tennis scholarship at SC or to go into the pro circuit, and he didn't know which was better, and so forth. And what he did is select to go pro, and he turned down a tennis scholarship at SC. Now, here's the baseball question. If you're a very talented high school player, what would you recommend somebody who's not ready for the major leagues? Because I think there are relatively few 17 or 18-year-old players in the major leagues. However, they need that kind of growth and maturity and experience. Would you recommend they go and get, say, a baseball scholarship at UCLA or Northwestern? Or would you recommend the kid go into one of the minor leagues? And I don't know how strong the minor leagues are this time. And I guess it adds to another question. Where does the Major League Baseball get most of its players? From college or from people from the minor leagues?
Yeah, great question, Ed. And it's a question I've gotten several times over the years, as you can imagine, as I get a little older, and my son's friends are kind of the age of playing in high school and college, and I think it's always going to be an individual choice. For me, I wasn't a real high draft pick. I wouldn't have been out of high school. I didn't get drafted at all in high school. But I think, if a kid is, really focused on going to college and studious and wants to do that, should certainly do that. However, if you're going to be drafted, if you're a top 50 player, let's say in the coming out of the draft, so that would be the first two or three rounds of the draft, it's very difficult to pass that up and go to college. First of all, there's going to be a multi-million-dollar signing bonus. And second of all, once you get into the organization, you're going to get absolutely every benefit of the doubt to make it to the major leagues, because the scouting department and the organization who invests in this type of player and drafts them so high has a vested interest in seeing them make it to the major leagues and be successful. And, a lot of people will say, the point of going to college is to get in a position to be successful and potentially make a nice living out after you graduate. Well, if somebody's going to give you $3 million as a high school senior, there's a risk of going to college, and particularly as a pitcher. I've seen this too. We had a kid, 3rd overall, that we drafted with the Padres about 8 or 9 years ago, and he was dead set on going to college. He went to the University of Florida, ended up blew out his elbow twice in college, and never made it to the major leagues. And he turned down $2.5 million. So
Wow.
that's tough. He's never going to be able to get that back. So I kind of sense, you're lamenting the fact that some kids wouldn't go to college who might want to, but that's really the way the system is. I would say if you aren't a top 5 rounder or so, then I would recommend going to college. And your last point of your question, your last question is a good one. Major League Baseball draws from the American kids, it draws from college and from high school, but the top high school players that are drafted in the 1st or 2nd round, those guys make it to the major leagues on a higher percentage than any other demographic, whether it be college or anything. So really the top high school players are the ones who make it the most.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Mark, I've got another question. It's always been bothering me, is the fact we talked about the abuse of players, the steroids, etc., Barry Bonds and different guys, power hitters. But Pete Rose was not on drugs. He bet on the game, and he's denied the Hall of Fame. We saw 2 other players denied just recently, All-Stars denied. Why? Seems to me Pete Rose should be elected, even though he did bet on his own team. But is there any justification for allowing him to go in the Hall of Fame as opposed to steroid abusers?
Hall of Fame, it's tricky. It's difficult. First of all, you got to remember the Hall of Fame is not connected to Major League Baseball in any way, any official way. It's a museum that's independently run, and so it's voted on by the writers, for example. It's not voted on by other players or coaches or managers or anything like that. So it's really an exhibition hall, and so my thing is just have exhibitions for whoever you think deserves to be there, and call it the era that it was. I mean, if you look at Babe Ruth, Babe Ruth played in a segregated era, so he didn't play against the best players in the world at that time. You can document that and put that as part of the museum. You can put Barry Bonds in some capacity, and Roger Clemens said, these guys were the best of their era, but this era was, and they were found to have used, illegal substances. The Pete Rose thing, same way. Pete obviously is more than qualified from his playing days. I will say this though, ever since I went into a professional locker room, the first thing you read when you walk in is this long thing about not to bet on games. Because if you think about it, the only thing that can really take down professional sports is if people were convinced that it was fixed. And so that's the beauty of sports, is it's the ultimate reality TV, because nobody knows what the ending's going to be. So if the public got to the point where, all of a sudden Major League Baseball was like wrestling and you knew it was staged, then it would lose its appeal. So I think if Pete would have come clean earlier and just, he got in kind of a shouting match with, I think it was Bart Giamatti was the commissioner at the time, and denied for so long. But I think, back to my point about having it just be a museum, he ought to be in there and represented in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Let's see, Phil had his hand up earlier than John did. So Phil, never mind. Okay, John O'Keefe. You're on mute, John.
Mark, can you tell us about a couple of games you played in that were really special for you, either because you did something really special yourself, or it was a special kind of a game, or a couple things that are high in your memory bank about your career?
Sure. I really have two memories from my personal career that stand out. The first is the year I played in Boston. There's something called Patriots Day in Boston. You may be familiar. It's a day when they run the Boston Marathon, and the Red Sox are always home that day, but they play a very early game, an 11 o'clock start, which is unusual. And then they run the marathon after that. And I was new to the team. This was, I think it's end of April or middle of April, something like that. And I ended up hitting a walk-off home run that day.
Oh boy.
And my parents happened to be back in town, and the marathon was about to start, and it was just it was just an awesome memory. And the second one is with the Dodgers. In 2019, I hit a walk-off single in a playoff game that was really exciting as a pinch hitter coming off the bench. So those two memories, on the personal level. And then played a lot of fun games too. I played in the first ever interleague game. We were with the Brewers. They were in the American League at the time, and we played against the Cubs in the first interleague game. During that 1998, forget about whether it was steroid induced or not, but when Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were going after the home run record, I was in the same division, and I played a lot of first base at that time, and so a lot of interaction with Sammy and with Mark McGwire, and that was a really fun summer.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's terrific. Yeah.
Any
How
other
was
questions?
I was just going to ask you, how was Madden to coach under?
Joe's fantastic. Just a really great guy, good baseball man. Free spirit. He's innovative as well. He was one of the first guys to kind of start shifting and start to use the bullpen differently. And I really like Joe. I have a lot of respect for him. And he's really one of the major reasons that I decided to try my hand at coaching, because I knew I could learn a lot from him. And it was a great experience that year in Chicago.
Good.
Okay, I've got another question. If I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. I grew up, Steve Shear, go ahead.
So you mentioned you played first base. Does it really matter whether a first baseman is left-handed or right-handed?
It doesn't really matter, but it's an easier, first baseman doesn't throw a whole lot, but it's an easier throw for him to make. For example, if there's a man on, first and second, he's playing behind the bag. If you get a ground ball to first, it's a natural motion just to take it and throw it to second with your left hand. As a righty, you got to turn or spin or do something like that. So it's really more so the way the diamond is set up. The left-handed thrower as a first baseman has an easier time of it. Much like a catcher, there's been some left-handed catchers in the major leagues, few and far between. But when they try to throw the ball to third base, for example, as a lefty, very difficult to take that ball and then direct it this way, where a right-hander just goes straight across like that. So that's why you don't see a lot of left-handed catchers.
Yeah.
Mark, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the days of DiMaggio and Musial and Williams and all those guys, and they were great hitters. In every sport, I've come to think that the people who play the sport today, whether it be tennis or anything, are better than they were 80 years ago. Is that true when it comes to hitting, or were those in the old days better hitters than they are today, or has the average guy improved so much that they're really better at hitting the ball today.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I see somebody put, is that my dad on the? Yeah, my dad's got, who is that putting up Peter, are you putting up a picture of my dad?
Yeah.
Looks like it. Anyway, no, Tom, so that's a funny question. My take is, the best players in every era would be the best players. If Babe Ruth played today, he would be the best player. I think, technology changes, certainly training methods and things like that, but it's always going to be whoever is the best athlete or best suited to that particular sport at that time. But what's also interesting too is, and I'm starting to fall into this trap a little bit, is you start thinking, boy, we did it differently, or these guys have it easy, or they're not as good as we were, or that kind of thing. So there's that generational, it's almost like being a parent, right? You say, well, in my day, we did it this way. And so, life goes on and things change. But I think the best players are always going to be the best players. That makes sense.
Yeah. Ed?
Oh,
You're mute again, Ed.
and golf.
If you were advising a young player who is a very, very athletic and so forth, what position would you recommend he stress? For example, my understanding is that there's a dearth of very good catchers, and that would be one of the best positions to go out for.
Yeah, that's true. The catching, it's difficult to find good catching. Pitching is always in vogue, but I think if, when you're a younger player, kind of a little leaguer or maybe a high schooler, typically, the best players will play in the middle of the diamond, whether it be catcher, pitcher, shortstop, and maybe center fielder. Most teams want to be strong up the middle, they call it, and those 4 or 5 positions are really the key. The other thing about youth sports is I think there's much too much, personalization right now. Kids are pairing off and playing baseball or football or basketball only growing up. I mean, I played football, basketball, baseball. I think it's important to play those various sports, at least until high school, and maybe then you specialize. But there's this groundswell of travel ball and kids specialize at a young age. I think it's detrimental to their athletic development.
Any other questions? Mark Rogo.
Mark, what's your thoughts on the extra innings second base runner rule now?
As a player, I like it. As a fan, I don't. If that makes sense, because one thing that really hurts a team is to play a long extra inning game, because you end up using a lot of pitching. You could play 15, 16, 17 innings, and still lose the game, or you win the game and you just get one victory, obviously. So I can see that. I liked it in that kind of shortened season, but I don't think you stay with that, forever. Although maybe you start where you have the regular, extra inning rules in terms of you just play until someone wins, and maybe you just have 3 innings of that, and then you put a guy on second base, so it doesn't go into. I played a couple games. I played a 19 inning game. I played a 20 inning game. Those take a toll on you.
Okay, thank you.
We have one final question here for Mark. If not, Mark, I want to thank you so much. You can tell by the questions and the inquiries, etc., that this was a very enjoyable presentation, and we thank you so much for appearing with us on Zoom, and maybe we can do it again sometime on a live interview at the in-person meeting. So anyway, thank you, Mark. In your honor, we're going to make a contribution to the Westwood Village Library, and with your name on it, and that contribution forthcoming.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to John O'Keefe for lining it up. I know I had to postpone, and then the pandemic postponed us a couple of times, but I'm certainly glad to finally get it done and to meet all you guys and see some familiar faces as well. So you guys keep up the good work, and we'll be in touch.
It was well worth having you, well worth waiting for you. And he certainly can tell you went to a Stanford of the Midwest because you're a very smart guy.
Yeah, I tell people now that Stanford was a safety school, John.
Good.
Next
All right.
week, Diane Good will be presiding. And look forward, Dr. Paul O'Reilly will be our speaker. So with that, we're going to end the meeting today. And join us. Remember, in 2 weeks, it's back to the Luskin Center in person. Hope you see you there. Everybody.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.